I'll just, I guess, introduce myself by saying I think of myself as a counterculture drug-using criminal trying to go legit. I would like to thank Ben and all the other organizers of Breaking Convention for putting all this together. It's a real pleasure to come to a conference that I'm not organizing, and that I can stay up really late at night and not worrying being there at 9 in the morning. And so what I'm going to be talking to you about today is really the mainstreaming of psychedelics and how we're going to try to do that, and how we've been working on that for, essentially, I've been working on that since 1972. Basically, we're making MDMA into a medicine. For those of you that were here before with the conversation with Ben and Julie Holland, I want to say that what we're doing is becoming more than a dream. And this printer, this was something that the day that Julie and I did MDMA together, I was actually working on a letter to Business Week, to a magazine that had an article about MDMA, and I was sort of saying that even though it had been criminalized, it was going to be criminalized, that we were going to work really hard to make the therapeutic use of MDMA become more than a dream. And when I went to print out the letter, I'd carried with me this printer. The printer went haywire, and all that it came out on this page was "become more than a dream." And so I saved that, and I framed it, and it's in my office. Later that day, after this printer went haywire, I was kind of looking at the printer, and I discovered that I dropped a hit of blotter acid in it. So as they say, only users lose drugs. So maybe it was the printer on acid, but this has been sort of the theme for all these years, that we're trying to become more than a dream and anchor it and get it grounded. There's interest not just in medicalizing MDMA, but in understanding how it works. This was a call to action by two prominent neuroscientists at Stanford, and they wrote this article last year in Cell, and they said all the tools of neuroscience have to be focused on MDMA, and it's because the world's populations need more compassion and empathy for one another. The study of MDMA provides one small but potentially important step towards reaching that goal. We were, Ben and I and John Bisson were at Wellcome Trust on Thursday, and they were actually saying that we could submit a group collaborative grant application to study mechanisms of action of MDMA. They're not interested in funding phase 3, but they, not to say that they'll give the grant, but we're going to try to work on a study that really does look at mechanisms of action of MDMA for empathy, compassion, and other things that it does. There's other reasons to be looking at MDMA. In addition to healing individuals with trauma, it's about healing societies, because we've learned through epigenetics that there are ways that trauma and anxiety is passed on from generation to generation. And we see that a lot in the world of conflicts that persist hundreds, thousands of years sometimes, passed down from generation to generation. And how do we break those cycles? And one of the things that's, in a sense, beautiful about epigenetics is that in addition to passing things down that are negative, you can correct things and correct these kind of multi-generational traumas within one generation sometimes. And this was Dr. Richard Rockefeller explaining this at the Commonwealth Club. Now, we've been actually working since 1986, since I started MAPS, so it's 31 years now. And it took us until November 29th, 2016 to have a meeting with the FDA to present our phase 2 data, which is the small pilot studies that are done basically to figure out how to design the larger studies. And so this meeting went really, really well, and FDA said that we could start this special protocol assessment process. What they said was that we communicated to them a compelling case that we had learned enough in phase 2 to move to phase 3. And so what then is an option, now basically MAPS is a nonprofit pharmaceutical company focused on psychedelics and marijuana. In 1986, when I started MAPS, I didn't realize that no nonprofit had ever made a drug into a medicine. And that happened in 1999 for the first time. And that was the abortion pill RU46. So controversial drugs abandoned by the pharmaceutical industry now are being made into medicines through nonprofit organizations. The special protocol assessment is a process whereby you it's an optional process, but when you engage in it with the FDA, they review every element of your protocol design, your statistical analysis plan, and critique it as you're going along. And then at the end of this, if they say they agree, then essentially what they're saying is that if you use this design and develop evidence for safety and efficacy, that they will make it into a medicine. The only loophole is that you don't identify some new risk during the course of your phase 3 studies. So we have been now going through this process ever since this November 29th meeting, and the last step in this was June 12th, maybe the last step. So we submitted a revised protocol based on our prior discussions where FDA agreed on pretty much everything that we were proposing. And FDA has till July 27th to get back to us. So we're very much hoping that this will come to a conclusion, would be able to open up. So in January 23rd is when we submitted the protocol. March 8th is when we got the first response, and it identified a bunch of areas that we had to work on. May 11th, we had the second meeting with FDA. And then May 30th, we got the official minutes. So they don't permit you to record the call. They make the official minutes. Then we were able to revise the protocol June 12th. And by also on the 22nd, this is sort of trying for the home run. The top priority projects for FDA are called breakthrough therapies. These are therapies that are drugs that are being developed for serious and life-threatening illnesses for which there's a large body of treatment-resistant patients, and they've got nowhere else to turn. So if you can have your drug declared a breakthrough therapy, what that means is the FDA is saying this is our priority, and they will expedite the development of this drug. They will provide senior FDA officials to help you in the design of your phase 3 protocols, which we've already received. And when it comes to the data, they will help you expedite the analysis and the review of the phase 3 data. So we have submitted this application on June 22nd. So many pharmaceutical companies ask for this that they now have a procedure where you have to submit a 2-page review of your data, and then they'll tell you whether you can submit a full application. So we have already done that. They said go ahead with the full application. So the 27th is when we're going to hear about whether we've come to agreement on the phase 3 design, and August 22nd is when we have to hear from FDA about breakthrough therapy. Once that's done, then we're going to start negotiations with the European Medicines Agency and also with NICE, trying to understand about the payers. So we anticipate starting phase 3 somewhere in March or April in the United States for FDA, and we hope a year after that, somewhere in 2019, we'll be able to start phase 3 in Europe, and hopefully we're budgeting more or less a year to come to agreement with EMA and NICE. Now, there's always, ants at the picnic. So the question is, which I'm asked a lot, which is what is the election of President Trump and the Attorney General George Sessions, what's it going to do to your drug development plans? And it's a reasonable question to ask, but because as we know, Attorney General Sessions is sort of a throwback, and he wants to bring back the drug war, he wants to go after medical marijuana, he wants to reimpose mandatory minimums, he wants to throw lots more people in jail. But it's important to note that the Trump administration has not yet gone after medical marijuana, and nor marijuana legalization states. And I think if they do so, they're going to lose a lot of support. So it's not clear exactly what they're going to do. But the thing that I'd like to share with you is that actually the election of Trump has made our job easier, not harder. And the reason is because Trump has talked a lot about his support for veterans. This is something that we were able to get from the VA. As of a year ago, there were 868,000 veterans that were receiving disability payments from the VA for post-traumatic stress disorder. And there's another 600,000, almost more, that are receiving disability payments for mental health related issues, depression, anxiety. So the burden to the veterans of war, which is one of the most underemphasized costs of war, is enormous. And so we're now estimating that it's at least $17 billion a year that the VA is spending on disability payments to these veterans with PTSD. And when you add in the other 600,000, it's $29 billion a year. And the numbers that I'm using, to be conservative, the last time the VA put out an official statistic of what is the average annual cost of disability payments, it was 2004. It was $20,000 per subject. So we're using 2004 cost estimates to come up with this $29 billion a year. And to put this in perspective, Trump has talked about enlarging the military budget by 10%, which is $54 billion. So more than half of that amount that he's wanting to give to the military is already being paid for disability payments for emotional costs of war. And we have a lot of support from veterans for this work. So I think the fact that we're working with veterans is going to make it very difficult for us to be shut down for political reasons. We've also gotten really good media, and we've been working on this very actively. And so I think the public education in many ways is more important than the research, because we saw when the public attitudes turned against psychedelics, the research was blocked and forbidden. So now I think we're at a state where we've been able, through careful media work, to get widespread media. And the ones on the right here are the red states, Stars and Stripes, Army Times, Fox News, military. So we've been sort of getting bipartisan media support for this work because of the veterans. We're also working with some of the leading VA therapists who have developed non-drug psychotherapies for PTSD, and they know that they leave a large number of people treatment resistant. So the first study that's already underway is with Candace Monson at Ryerson University, and it's called Cognitive Behavioral Conjoint Therapy. And what that means is, conjoint means couples therapy. So it's couples therapy where one member has PTSD and it affects the relationship. And we've been able to get permission to give both members of the couple MDMA. And it's been fantastic, because that's the first time actually since 1990, when Rick Strassman got permission to do work with DMT, that we've been able to have more than one person receive psychedelic at the same time. And also, we can never medicalize couples therapy, because in order to medicalize a drug, it has to be for a recognized disorder. And so difficult relationships are not a recognized disorder, although we know how problematic they can be. So this is kind of a back end around to couples therapy. And I think once we start talking about the value of MDMA for couples therapy, there'll be a lot more interest in it as well, a lot more mainstream support. So we are primarily focusing on PTSD, but we have a bunch of measures of the strength of the relationship. And so far, it's looking incredibly well. We're also working with Barbara Rothbaum at Emory, and one of the main developers, one of the main therapies is called prolonged exposure for PTSD. And the theory is that you just repeat the trauma over and over and over, and eventually you get desensitized to it. But it often re-traumatizes people. Some people it will help, but it's more like the antidepressants. It kind of deadens you to it. It doesn't really help you process and move through it. And there's also a large number of people that are treatment resistant to this and drop out. So we're blending MDMA with prolonged exposure. This study will probably start in about 6 months. And so we're sort of seeding the key opinion leaders in the treatment world for research for PTSD connected with the military. Now, the other big part of this, I'll just say, not connected to this slide, is that Trump is trying to deregulate a lot of things. And so it's good for MAPS and bad for America. But in the drug development process, they're trying to make it easier for drugs to make it through the system. So I think all of these factors mean that I feel that we are, even in these dark days, we are able to move this through the system, and it's actually going to be facilitated rather than hurt. We had to standardize our method of therapy. And so we've developed this treatment manual. The essence of it is that we are not the guides. We never use the word guide. The person's unconscious is the guide. What comes up under the experience of MDMA, the therapists follow and support, but we don't use guided imagery. We don't sort of say, now you must talk about the trauma. It's more supportive psychotherapy. And within an 8-hour session with male-female teams, there's enough time, people do find their way to talk about the trauma in many different unique patterns, but it always seems to happen. So this is our treatment manual. It's on the website if any of you wanted to take a look at it. We have developed a training program for therapists because that's really very key. We've now trained 84 therapists, 42 male-female co-therapist teams, and the first part is this 14-hour online course. Then we have a week-long session where it's residential, where people are mostly watching videotapes of therapy sessions and then referring to the treatment manual. And in addition to the treatment manual, we have what's called adherence criteria. So it sort of simplifies the treatment manual, and independent raters that we've trained watch the videotapes and sort of give feedback to the therapist on how well they're adhering to the principles in the manual. So we teach them that. Then we have some home study things. They have to do holotropic breath work, or they can pick any kind of other non-ordinary state of consciousness approach. Then we have another week-long in-person training where we talk about working in teams, because again, it's a male-female team. We talk about difficult patients, body work, and other issues. And then after all of this, we really don't feel like this is enough training. So we have this Part E and the optional therapy. So we went to the FDA and we said, really, we want to give MDMA to therapists as part of their training. But we can't do that because it's an illegal drug. The only way we can do that is in the context of a psychotherapeutic process. And so the FDA said, here's how to design a protocol. We'll work with you. And so we were able to get a protocol. It's psychological effects in healthy volunteers taking MDMA in a therapeutic setting. And so we can limit who's in the study to therapists in our training program. And we can take people from all over the world and have done so already. And then this Part E is that the final step, and this has added $1 million to our costs, is that the real way you train therapists is that they work with a patient and then you give them feedback. And so again, because it's MDMA, we can only do that in the context of a protocol. So we've worked it out with FDA. We just got permission last week. We're going to have a open label phase 2 training protocol, which means that there's no double blind. Everybody's getting MDMA. MAPS is paying all the costs, but the first patient that these co-therapist teams work with, some of them have already worked on phase 2, but if they've not worked on phase 2, they will get one patient open label for us to watch the videotapes and in real time give them feedback over the course of this treatment of this one patient. And then we feel that that will make these therapist teams ready for phase 3. So it's still minimal training, but we're finding so many enthusiastic people that have had a lot of their own background that are coming to be in the training programs that we're fairly hopeful it's going to work really well. Then you get the certificate. There's 2 certificates. I don't have the other one here. The other one is going to be in rainbow colors. This is for those that decided not to take the MDMA. This was our investigator meeting in April. We were planning, this was right before Psychedelic Science. So a little bit of the data. So we have 107 patients that we've treated in these different sites, Israel, United States, Switzerland, and Canada, 107 PTSD patients. We've explored all of these different doses. I had the idea that low-dose MDMA would be the ideal control condition for full-dose MDMA, that there would be confusion about the doses, and that would be producing a double-blind. And what we tried to do is find which dose would cause enough confusion but wouldn't be enough therapeutic that it would be hard to find a difference between the 2 groups. So that's why we tested all these different doses. We also were concerned about neurotoxicity, the whole issue of MDMA neurotoxicity, which blocked research for quite a few, more than a decade and a half. And so these are just neurocognitive tests before and after. The blue is before, the orange is after. And so there's no effect on neurocognitive performance, or people are getting a little bit better. So based on this, really the neurotoxicity issue is no longer something that the FDA cares about. I mean, they care about it, but they've decided that through all of the evidence that we have and these data, that in the few times that we administer MDMA, it's not a real salient issue. This is the phase 2 data at the primary endpoint, which is 2 months after the last MDMA session. And so this is just to show you that there's a large effect size, 0.9, and it's on the basis of this data that we presented to the FDA. And they said this is really good. We also looked at depression. A lot of people with PTSD have depression, so depression scores also go way down. This is the sort of everybody that's in our study, if they get randomized to the placebo group, they're able, after we uncover the blind, to go through the study again with full dose MDMA. So that helps with recruitment, helps with retention. So this is everybody that was in the study, whether they got MDMA in the open label or they got MDMA in the randomized study. And this is 12 months after the last MDMA session. So you can see dramatic declines, way statistically significant. So 23% of the subjects that we've treated no longer have PTSD after the therapy or after low-dose MDMA. So what that is showing is we have 40 hours of therapy. So the therapy itself is effective. But when you add full-dose MDMA after 2 sessions, it more than doubles to 55% no longer have PTSD. When we add a 3rd session, we're up to 61%. And when we look at them a year later, 2/3 of very problematic PTSD and people that are treatment resistant no longer have PTSD at the end of the year. So it's pretty incredible results. And the FDA is used to psychiatric medications that treat symptoms but don't really address the underlying cause to the point of a cure. So we're saying that for some subjects, 2/3 of them no longer even have the diagnosis. Now, that doesn't mean that the ones that didn't couldn't also benefit from a few more exposures to MDMA. We found people that are high on dissociation, people that have borderline personality disorders, they'll need more sessions. So I'm going to show you a very brief video now. It's just a few minutes from one of the therapy sessions with a Marine who was in Iraq. Rage, he was dealing with rage all the time. He had problems, uncontrolled anger.
I never realized how much I thought I was being the peaceful person, but I didn't realize how much I was punishing that aspect of me. I think maybe in Iraq I saw what it was capable of, and I think I was too afraid to, and a part of me just feels like so bad that I did that to him. I mean, I know it's me, but I just describe it wisely.
Part of you.
Yeah. But I just, that was really amazing. And I don't know, I just got this amazing sense of just, I guess, wisdom. I really don't know.
Sounds a lot like wisdom to me.
It was really amazing. And even when I try and think of that really rageful aspect of me, like I can't even, I know it's there, but it just doesn't. I really feel like so much more at peace with everything.
Great.
Like even if I try and think about Iraq and everything, like I somehow feel like really peaceful about the fact that that's my journey, and that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Part of me I know this is part of the part of the drug, but when I try and think, am I going to be able to hold on to this this understanding and this somewhat of wisdom, this knowledge that I have now. I mean, just asking myself that question, I feel like it's so profound that I don't think I could really forget it.
This is Nicholas Blackston, and he is featured in the book Acid Test. And he is still doing tremendously well after the treatment. So here's what we learned from phase 2 studies. We first off learned that the cause of PTSD is irrelevant. Our first study was with mostly women survivors of childhood sexual abuse who had PTSD an average of over 17 years. Then we moved to mostly male veterans. We've worked with people with accidents, with PTSD from a range of causes. And so once people develop PTSD, the treatment that we're offering seems to help regardless of the cause of PTSD. So that's really good news because that means that we have sort of a general treatment for PTSD. It's not just for a certain segment of the PTSD population. We also learned to our surprise that the low doses of MDMA, and we're not talking microdoses here, we're talking 25 to 40 milligrams, that they actually had an anti-therapeutic effect. That they made people a little bit agitated, they activated them, but they didn't sufficiently reduce their anxieties and fears. So that here they'd been carrying this trauma for a long time, and now they're in this therapeutic setting and they're supposed to be addressing their trauma, which they've not been able to address before. And these low doses actually make people uncomfortable. More people dropped out of the study with these doses. And so what that meant is that these low doses are not an adequate control in producing a double-blind experiment. It does produce more blinding, but it makes it easier to show a difference between the therapy with full dose and the therapy with low dose. It's better to compare therapy with full dose with therapy with inactive placebo, even though we acknowledge that the placebo is not going to really stay double-blind. And we've persuaded the FDA of that as well. We also demonstrated safety, and we showed a medium to large effect size on the CAPS-4. There's since been a move to the CAPS-5, so we're going to be using that. The other thing that we learned, and I think this is really important from what you've all heard from so much of the presentations about the work with the classic psychedelics, is that there's a relationship between the mystical experience and therapeutic outcome. With MDMA, we use the same measures of mystical experience. And you can see here that 0.6 is considered a full mystical experience. And so we have quite a large number of people that have full mystical experiences, according to these questionnaires, in the MDMA sample that we have. Much more, again, in the active doses than comparator doses, but not as much as with psilocybin or with LSD. But there's still a fair amount of people that have these mystical experiences, and what we show is that there's no correlation at all. And so that is actually something that we found quite encouraging with our non-directive method. So we're not trying to steer people to a mystical experience, and we also were surprised to discover that the 75 milligram dose group did really, really well, where we compared 30, 75, and 125. And so in fact, it did a little bit better than the 125. And what we think is necessary to healing trauma is that you feel safe when you're reviewing your biographical traumatic experiences. And though there may be roots to the birth trauma or transpersonal roots, mostly we see that people, if they can kind of rewrite their memories in a way, where with memory reconsolidation, you look at a trauma while you're feeling safe, and you can place it in the past. There's a reduction of activity in the amygdala, enhancement of activity in the frontal cortex. You place it in the past, and then when you reconsolidate the memory, you have switched the emotional tag, which is fear and anxiety, from one of peace and putting it in the past. And so then when you remember it again later, you actually we find that people have a better memory for the trauma and what happened, but they don't have the fear and anxiety. And so therefore it suggests that the mystical experience, which is sort of not so much biographical but transpersonal, isn't essential for helping people get over trauma from their biography. So validates that this is going to be basically the phase 3 design, 3 sessions. The first one is going to be 80 milligrams. Everybody goes through one or the other of these, either inactive placebo and the therapy. And then there's going to be a decision point where the therapist and the patients decide, was that dose sufficient or do they want to go higher? They won't know exactly what higher means, but it'll mean 120. And then the third session is similarly optional, a little bit of fine tuning, and then the 2-month follow-up. And that's the date where the FDA is looking at the data. We will do 1-year follow-ups, but that's not for approval from the FDA. That's more for really showing that insurance companies should pay for it, because it'll last. Here's the other big thing, and I know I'm running out of time, so I'll be very fast, but the whole system is rigged in favor of the pharmaceutical industry. And that's really, really good, and so for us. And what the thing is that you can do, which is completely legitimate, is what's called an interim analysis. So one of the hardest points that you need to do is you figure out what your effect size is, you do your statistical calculations, and you come up with a number of subjects you need to get statistical significance. But we're working with the CAPS-5 instead of the CAPS-4. We're working with all these new therapy teams. We're new sites. So we're not 100% sure what's the exact right number we need for statistical significance. It costs us an average of around $50,000 per subject. So these are expensive studies. Some fraction of them go through it twice. So you don't want to have too many people in your study because then you can't afford it. So what the FDA permits you to do is have an unblinded data monitoring committee that looks at the data when you're about 60 or 70% through, and all they'll tell you is you don't need to add anybody, or you need to add X number of people to get statistical significance. So if your effect size is smaller than you thought it would be, we won't be told, is there more variability? Did the placebo group do better than we thought, or the MDMA group do worse? All we're going to be told is a number, and if we can afford it, we add that number, and then we get significance, and then the FDA will approve the study. So this is basically our timeline. It ends in 2021. I'll just say that here's our projected cost. This is our America First plan. We felt that it was important to sort of go with the harmony and with the times. So our America First plan means FDA first. And so if we have a medium to large effect size, which is what we've had before, it'll be $20 million and 200 subjects. If we have a small to medium effect size, we're going to need up to 300 subjects, and that'll be up to $25 million. However, if we have a medium to large effect size, 300 subjects might be enough to get it approved by FDA and EMA. And then if we have a small to medium effect, it's $35 million, 450 subjects. And we've been getting so ambitious that we figured, let's go global. And so global hypothetical is $50 billion. And actually, I was working today on a team that's interested in doing MDMA research in China. And so we are going global. And we already have $10 million. And I'd like to say that as you see on your conference bags about Dr. Bronner's, that Dr. Bronner's has pledged $5 million, $1 million a year for 5 years. So the question is, how is this different than other drugs? The FDA has what's called REMS, risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, that you have to customize for every drug to make sure that the benefits outweigh the risks. So the only people that are going to be able to prescribe MDMA are going to be people that have been trained by us in the administration of MDMA. They can modify the administration through innovation if they want to do it in some different way. It's called off-label prescription. The label will be our method, but they can use other methods. It will always be in clinics. It will never be a take-home medicine, because it's only to be administered under supervision, and there's going to be certain safety screenings that are going to be required to be followed through. So talking with the FDA ahead of time about these REMS is making regulatory agencies a lot more comfortable about saying yes, because this is the opposite of medical marijuana. Medical marijuana is a take-home drug. People do it at home. They can give it to their friends. From a drug control perspective, it's more of a nightmare for DEA, but this is not. So that's eliminated a lot of the concerns about making this into a medicine. We've started a public benefit corporation so that we're going to sell it through where we maximize social benefits, not profits. These are going to be the future psychedelic psychotherapy clinics. You're going to go to Google Maps one day and put in psychedelic clinics. This is what you're going to get. Once this is all done, I'm going to go back to being a psychedelic therapist. This is my license, and I just wanted to say, this is the last one, that we just had Psychedelic Science, and it was an incredible conference, and we have the videos online. So if any of you are interested in that, just go to psychedelicscience.org, and thank you very much.